Hi Year 10, I'm sorry I can't be with you on your last day before the end of term for you. And I wish you all a fantastic week next week, whether you are going on cadets or going to do some work experience. I just want you to, today, assess your own evolution tests, please. I have copied them, so the ones that you are being given are just copies of what you've returned to me, and I will assess them as usual. But often some of the greatest learning will come from you really looking at your question in relation to the actual solutions and reflecting on where you need to develop. So as you go through this test with my solutions right here, I'd like you to make corrections and show me the best possible answer on your paper, and then I'll look at those as well. So here are my solutions. Let's start with our multiple choice section. Section A. Which one of these is required for natural selection to occur? You need inheritance, obviously. You need unequal reproductive success. You need variation between individuals, and therefore the answer is D, it's all of the above. Without variation, then selection for or against any phenotype would wipe out the whole population or none of it, so that's not very selective. So yes, the answer to question 1 is D. Let's look at question 2. Which choice best describes the relationship between natural selection and the theory of evolution? Well, natural selection is the process or the mechanism by which evolution occurs over time. Okay, so A is in fact the answer there. Question 3. Unequal reproductive success can lead to natural selection. So D. Option A can lead to a population being less well adapted. That's almost the opposite to natural selection. Increases variation. It actually reduces the variation in the population by selecting for one of the phenotypes. Does not affect the frequency of expression of traits in succeeding generations of population. Well, yes, it does. It's likely to make certain traits more prevalent in the population, those advantageous traits. So that's why the other options aren't true, and D is the answer. Number 4. What does adaptation mean in a biological context? Now, this is a tricky one for some people because we tend to talk in everyday language about how we adapt to situations. But in biological and evolutionary terms, we're really talking about how whole populations can adapt and have more favourable traits in relation to their environment. So the answer is B, the accumulation of favourable variations in a population over time. Question 5. What accounts for the different breeds of domestic dogs? Well, that is in fact artificial selection. Question 6. Over a span of 2 decades, scientists measured the changes in beak size of a population of the Galapagos ground finches. This led Darwin to his theory of evolution through natural selection. Okay, so his observations on the Galapagos led him to the theories that we now know about and are commonly accepted today. Question 7. Antibiotic resistance evolves in bacteria because the presence of antibiotics favours bacteria that already have the genes for resistance. Now, if you've done a couple of the past papers that were on LMS, this would have been an easy one. The genes have to be in the bacteria to start with, so antibiotics do not cause resistance, but what they do is they allow bacteria who have naturally acquired resistance, potentially through a mutation, likely through a mutation, allow the antibiotics wipe out the vulnerable cells or organisms and allow those with resistance to thrive. Okay, but the bacteria have to have the resistance to start with. Question 8. Using the cladogram, phylogenetic tree, very, very similar, for bears depicted below, choose from among the following bear species the one that is most distantly related to the sun bear. I really want you to annotate this kind of question so that you focus on the idea that it's a distant relationship you're looking for and not close relationship or common recent ancestry. And the answer is the giant panda, because if you look at the sun bear, you have to go all the way back here to find a node or a branch point between the giant panda and the sun bear. Whereas the other options, such as the speckled bear, the sloth bear, or the brown bear, the point at which those species diverged is much more recent in a time perspective. We've actually got time across the bottom here, so you could even quantify it and identify when the species diverged from each other. And if you look at this node here, it's 22 perhaps million years ago. Question 9. What does Darwinian evolution maintain about the evolutionary relationship between humans and monkeys? Humans and monkeys are descended from a common ancestor that lived long ago. B. Question 10. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution suggests that one species could, over time, evolve into a new species. We call this divergence or divergent evolution. 11. In the process of evolution by natural selection, illustrated in the accompanying figure, which one of the following is the mechanism or agent for natural selection? Clearly not artificial selection, so it looks like there's no human intervention occurring here. Selective breeding, again, another term or words used for artificial or human selection. Selective beetles doesn't really make sense, so the answer is in fact selective predation. Question 12. The streamlined shape of sharks and whales, similar but not due to a common ancestor, is an example of analogous structures or analogous traits. A trait is just another word for a characteristic. Question 13. A population of grasshoppers in Eildon has two colour phenotypes, green and brown. Typically, the area receives adequate water to maintain healthy green grass. Assume a bird that eats grasshoppers moves into the area. How will this affect natural selection of the grasshoppers? In all likelihood, we're assuming the bird is a visual predator. It will consume the beetles that are more obvious and less well camouflaged to their environment, so the brown phenotype should be more easily seen by the predator and therefore decrease in frequency. 14. This is an interesting question. Which of the following would you predict would evolve in a trout taken from streams with predators that focus on prey colour and put into streams lacking predators? So what we've done is we've taken fish from a stream where there's presumably a visual predator and moved it into a stream with an absence of predators. What is the likely outcome? Will the trout become more colourful, less colourful, not changing coloration, evolve to have females prefer less colourful males, or trout would evolve to have females prefer even more colourful males? In the absence of selection pressures from a visual predator, in all likelihood there would be no change in coloration in the general population. However, it doesn't eliminate the chance of some mutations occurring and some trout becoming more colourful and others becoming less colourful. But in general, without the selection pressures there, the trout would not change in colour. Okay, so C is the answer there. I stuffed that one up, if you can see that. 15. What happens to a species when environments change? Well, the different traits will become more adaptive or more well matched to their environment. Okay, so that is D. 16. Natural selection is best described as working on existing variation of traits to favour those better suited to the organism's environment. So 16 is C. Which of these actually evolves? Not individuals. Okay, so individual organisms, whether it be a bacteria or a human or a bird, cannot actually evolve. Communities are the the definition of a community is lots of different species all together. Okay, so we tend to talk about evolution in terms of a single species. So it's not communities, and mutations are the mechanism by which evolution or variation occurs. So the answer is B, populations. Evolution is a process that occurs as a result of differences in the ability to survive. So question 18 is D, should be fairly straightforward. 19. What determines which traits will be passed on to the next generation in the greatest frequency? So the fitness of the trait or the characteristic to that environment. The answer is D. Which of the following is not an example of natural selection? Scientists breed cows that give greater amounts of milk than their ancestors. So this was one of those that I wanted you to underline the word not, and then C is not an example of natural selection. The image above illustrates what evolutionary concept? They are homologous structures. If the weather in Bendigo, Victoria, changed to very cold, snow on the ground 8 months of the year, over the next few years, what change might occur? And the answer to this one is B. If a mutation occurred which caused white furs to develop, such possums would have a better chance to survive and produce more offspring with this characteristic. Okay, the answer there is B. Which of the following statements is false? You must underline that and focus on the word false. Convergent evolution demonstrates close evolutionary relationships. No, convergent evolution actually shows that similar selection pressures can lead to similar phenotypes, but without the common recent ancestor. Which of the following is not one of the premises of which evolution by natural selection is based? And it is not that organisms can alter their genes to help them survive in a particular environment. Of course, organisms cannot alter their own genes. 25. A biologist analyzes the DNA of 3 different primates. She finds that primates A and B have almost exactly the same DNA sequences. Those of primate C are different in several places. She would most likely infer A and B are more closely related to one another than either is to primate C. 26. The following shows actual data comparing DNA sequences from humans and several other species. So the way to manage this kind of question is to read through the options, try and work out exactly what the question is asking, and then annotate the information that you've been given. So from this data, what can we conclude? All of them are discussing the relationship between the species, and commonly it is between humans and other species. So humans are more closely related to the chimps and the bonobo. So you need to look at the sequence for the human and then the chimp and bonobo, and you'll notice that all 3 are actually the same. So statement 1 is not true. There seems to be no relationship between these species. That's not in fact true because the sequence is the same, indicating there is some relationship between these species. D, bonobos, gorillas and gibbons form the most closely related grouping. Well, with the top 3 being the same, I would suggest that those 3 are the most closely related grouping. So the actual answer is letter C. The least closely related to humans seem to be gorillas and orangutans. So I've actually identified the nucleotides that are different to humans, and to help you understand how I've done that one. 27. If 2 species have each descended from the same common ancestor, then C, those species will have DNA sequences in common. 28. Natural selection operates on an individual's phenotype. So that's the traits and the characteristics that the individual has, such as skin colour, enabling it to camouflage, or ability to jump, or ability to sing the brightest song, for example. All of those are descriptions of phenotype, and that is what natural selection operates upon. 20